Okay, good morning, Dance 101 students. Welcome to our next continuation of our ballet history. A couple things I just wanted to go over. I really enjoyed reading those of you who responded in the discussions and posted comments. For those of you who didn't, please know I do accept late papers. I understand that for a lot of people, this online platform is new and it's hard to get used to. So I do accept late papers. You won't get full credit, but you can still get a good grade in the class if you just participate as much as you can. So for this, this week's participation is already up in your assignment tab, and it's going to be, I think it's going to be really exciting. However, the video is a half an hour long, so please make sure that you allot that amount of time. I will make this presentation much shorter so that as not to take up too much of time for this week. A couple of things I wanted to just clarify between romantic ballet and classical ballet. I know we covered a lot of time period on last Thursday, almost 500 years, and so just a couple key dates that I'd like you to write down and remember, so it will come up later in some of your reading quizzes. So in 1581, Catherine de' Medici commissioned Balthasar de Beaujolais to choreograph a ballet. It was very mythological and meant to flatter the French court, and it was the first time that ballet had been put together in that very staged and choreographed to a story fashion. And it was all men at the time, and a lot of the steps came out of pre-Christian folk dances, which then were made more ornate with their headdresses and costumes. And so that's they had to slow a lot of the steps down and make them more elegant in that way because of their costumes. Then in 1661, just so we're going over a quick evolution of ballet, in 1661, Louis XIV came along. He loved ballet. He danced ballet every day for 20, 30 years. He had beautiful long legs and big calf muscles, and he liked to show them off. And just a quick little tidbit, which I find fun, because I myself am a classically trained ballerina. There is a step in ballet called entrechocat, and it's where the feet are like this. So you're in fifth position, and the feet go back, front. So you land with the same foot in front. Now the folk dance step actually went beat, 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 beat. His calves were so big that he couldn't actually beat that many times because his muscles got in the way. And so he made up the step to go entrechocat, back, front, back, front. Yeah, so anyway, that's kind of funny. So he's the one who started the very first Royal Dance Academy, and that was a very big deal because that was the first time that we were actually doing a formalized dance school. And because he did this formalized dance school, he actually had to codify each of the steps that he wanted to have his dancing masters be able to teach and continue on with that tradition. And so that is why our ballet steps are in the French language, when ballet actually really originated out of Italy. But what we know today we have maintained those same steps, and we've made them more difficult, but we've maintained those same ballet terminology. Again, that was only men dancing and training at that time. So it wasn't until we came into the 1700s that Pierre Noverre wrote a letter. This is all in your old PowerPoint if you'd like to revisit it. Pierre Noverre wrote a letter saying we should take away the fancy headdresses, we should take away these ornate costumes and mythological creatures and make them about humans expressing human emotions. And I mean, maybe there'll still be some like ethereal or otherworldliness to it, but we're dressed like humans. And we're going to do bigger, more virtuosity in our steps. So that's why in the 1700s we started doing that. And last week we watched a little excerpt from La Fille Margardée, which was the very first ballet to really have human themes and peasants and dancing, and in that way really stripping away all of that courtship and making it more about the movement and the dancing, and the costumes then reflected that. So that brings us into the 1800s, which is really when women started rising into ballet and prominence, which in the whole scheme of ballet history is not that long ago. So in the 1800s, we had the invention of pointe shoes. That was that was actually inspired by a flying machine that was showing during the French Revolution and showing people flying across stages, and that inspired the invention of the point shoe, which we still use primarily for female dancers today. And females were taking the lead and becoming very famous. They were sort of like what, like I say, our NBA stars are today. That's what ballet dancers were in the 1830s and 40s. So the part that I wanted to clarify is I felt like there was some confusion as to what is romantic ballet and what is classical ballet. Okay, so the romantic era is defined as what an earlier era than classical ballet. That is when the invention of point shoes came. The tutus were still below the knee. The port-de-bras was very soft. Okay, in classical it's more linear, and the port-de-bras is very soft in romantic ballet. And the skirts are longer, and the themes have this otherworldliness or in exotic locations. So in Giselle, we had the Willies. We watched the Willies kill Hilarion, my favorite scene. And, you know, the Willies are this otherworldly, ghostly women who dance men to death in the forest. And then in La Sylphide, we had a man from the Scottish Highlands, which at the time was very exotic, who is in love with a sylph that only he can see. So those are examples of romantic ballet. Classical ballet came along later in the 1800s, okay? And classical ballet is very much a continuation or a predecessor to what we see in dance today. And the tutus are short. The technique is very difficult. The legs are higher. The arms are straighter. There's pirouettes, lots of turning on point. The men have very big parts again. They're very much have a huge jumps and leaps and turns. And the men are more than just the support for the ballerinas on point, but they are actually dancing quite a bit. And so classical ballet, so when you go to a ballet and you see long skirts below the knees and this sort of ethereal themes, then you know, okay, this ballet was probably choreographed in the 1830s to 1860s, okay? If you go to a ballet that is maybe a fairy tale, and the skirts are very short, like Sleeping Beauty or Cinderella. And this was a big one. Swan Lake is a classical ballet. It's not a romance ballet. The tutus are very short in Swan Lake. The steps are very difficult. And it was choreographed by Marius Petipa. So if you see Petipa, it's a classical ballet. So that brings us into today's lecture. I just wanted to review that with you because I want you all to feel very confident when you go to the ballet and to be able to recognize what it is you're seeing historically as well as aesthetically. Okay, and I'm glad that you have opinions about which ones you like better, and I encourage you to continue to fine-tune those aesthetic values in this course, as you will be exposed to a lot of different kinds of dancing. So today we're going to go kind of past Petipa, still into the Russians, okay? So we're going to go ahead and screen share here and get right into it. And like I said, this will be a shorter lecture today. Okay. Okay, so here we go. Right into Serge Diaghilev. So Serge Diaghilev was a Russian promoter in the early 1900s. He was very much part of the social elite of Russia, and he was not a very good musician or dancer or artist, but he was very much a fan of all of the above. And so what he was an impresario. He first started working for the Mariinsky Theater in 1899, and he was exposed to some of the dancers there that were studying under Marius Petipa, which would be Vaslav Nijinsky, Anna Pavlova, Michael Fokine, okay, very important players in ballet history. And so the Ballet Russe, he is who started the Ballet Russe. There's a lot more information on here, but really what I want you to know, you're going to be watching an entire documentary about him. I just want you to know that he came and he started the Ballet Russe. Okay, and so here's Sergei Diaghilev, and this was a funny quote. He says he was visiting with the King of Spain, And the king says, "And what, dear sir, do you do in the company?" asked King Alfonso of Spain upon meeting Sergei Diaghilev, famed impresario of Diaghilev's Ballet Russe. "You don't conduct the orchestra or play an instrument. You don't design the mise en scène, and you don't dance. What do you do?" Ever charming and self-assured, Diaghilev replied, "Your Majesty, I am like you. I do no work. I do nothing, but I am indispensable." And he was indispensable. He had very much a vision of bringing together visual artists and musicians and these ballerinas and ballet masters and incredible choreographers to put something completely new on the stage. Completely new, stuff that we had never seen. We had the classical ballet, has had its good run of 30 years, 40, pushing 40 years in the theaters, and now we have that Dionysian force that is coming who wants to bring the chaos and shake it up a little bit. And that is always our impetus for change. These are just some of the very famous ballet dancers. So we had Václav Nijinsky, who's an extremely interesting character. You will learn more about him in the discussion and the documentary. Anna Pavlova, all of the dancers, he handpicked each one and said, he would look at them like Tamara, I can't say her name very well, Karsavina. She was a founder of the Royal Academy of Dance. We have Filia Dubravska, who ended up helping out with the School of American Ballet. So it was all of these dancers that he brought together through his vision that upon his death in the 1930s, went out and spread their wings all over the world and bringing dance to places that it had never been. And without Sergei Diaghilev's ballet, we wouldn't have things like the American Ballet Theater or New York City Ballet. So it's really important to know that this is a very pivotal point in our dance history. Up until this point, our history has moved very slow. And as we get into the 1900s, along with our technology and our culture in general, everything begins to move quicker. Michael Fokine, these are some of the ballets that he did. A lot of these you can still see today, being performed today. If you look up here in the upper right-hand corner, you see the long skirts. This was Michael Fokine did a revision of La Sylphide, and he called it Les Sylphides, but it was, he was going back and revisiting the Romantic ballet style. And down in the left-hand corner, you have Anna Pavlova as the Dying Swan. Well, in this case, Michael Fokine revisited Swan Lake, which was performed 40 years prior, and choreographed by Marius Petipa and Lev Ivanov. He revisited the Dying Swan and re-choreographed it in the classical ballet style. But as you can see, the rest of these pictures are depicting very different types of costumes and sets and dance styles that are now being put on stage. Okay, we're going to just skip over this. I mean, feel free if you find this intriguing or you want to further study Michael Fokine for your midterm, feel free to go back and reread some of these. They're all on the Noble. Václav Nijinsky was an extremely interesting character, and you will learn more about him and see some of his dancing and live footage. But he's very famous because he was a genius. He was the things that he promoted and did on stage were revolutionary. He did a lot of things that were turned in that maybe were scandalous at the time. And for example, in 1913, he had La Sacra du Printemps, but a lot of people just call that the Rite of Spring. And that caused a huge scandal because of the music, and the choreography was so different and to some people offensive to be put on stage in the Paris Opera, that there was a riot that broke out. And I ask you, do you think that there's anything that we could put on stage now that would actually be so offensive that a riot would break out? I don't know, I think that we are pretty numb. But at this point, it was still, people still really cared a lot. Yeah, this is more about the Rite of Spring. It goes into some of the choreographies, some of the history behind it. It's a very interesting dance. And again, if this interests you, feel free to have this be your research project for the midterm choreography exam. There's a picture of Joffrey's reconstruction of Rite of Spring. The Joffrey Ballet did the first reconstruction in 1987. Anybody had done since 1913 of like truly trying to replicate what was done in 1913. So that was a very exciting moment for dance historians. Oh, after Diaghilev died in the 1930s, Leonid Massine, who was a principal dancer and choreographer of Diaghilev's Ballet Russe, he then formed the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo. And so now he took and choreographed over 100 ballets, great ballets, and this was in the 1940s, and so the film was also incorporating a lot of dance, and they used a lot of his material. The Red Shoes is a very famous movie, great movie, shows dancing and Michael Fokine's choreography, but he really brought ballet to the United States and to South America. He choreographed and performed extensively throughout the United States and South America, and it's really the reason why we have a presence now. And he also continued with Diaghilev's tradition of working with artists and musicians, and these are some of the artists that he worked with was Picasso. Picasso actually ended up marrying a dancer from Diaghilev's Ballet Russe, and he painted several props and backdrops for his company in their productions. Some more. And Massine also worked with Picasso and Eric Satie. Bronislava Nijinská choreographed for the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo for Massine. She was a very interesting person. She was Nijinsky's sister, and when she choreographed, she would wear plastic gloves because she didn't like to actually touch the dancers with her bare hands. But she did a lot of things, lighthearted comedies, very intricate ballets and famous ballets. You can see that he also worked with Coco Chanel and Pablo Picasso, very famous artists that you have probably heard of. Again, these are some of the set designs and costuming of Bronislava Nijinská's choreography. This brings us into more present day, more relevant to you perhaps, George Balanchine. He's probably one of the most prolific choreographers. He was not American, however, he did most of his choreography in America. He started dancing at the Mariinsky Theater, and he had some colleagues, and he started knowing some people who were in the Ballet Russe, and he was, in 1924, he was permitted to go travel to London and perform. And while in London, Sergei Diaghilev saw him, and he was taken into the company. Now, at that point, then they closed the door to the Soviet Union, and he could no longer go back to Russia, but he ended up traveling all over with the Ballet Russe. And then he was in the United States performing. He did some choreography for Serge Diaghilev, but then he hurt his knee and had to retire from performing. And he met a very wealthy man in America who wanted him to start his own company. But he said that he wouldn't start his own company, that he said he had to first start a school. And so he went to New York and started the American Ballet School. And then it became New York City Ballet. Well, this is a little bit more about the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, which happened after Serge Diaghilev died, and Leonid Massine took it over. And he became, for the next 20 years, he traveled throughout the United States and South America, and also choreographed for several TV productions and movies. These are just some pictures of some of the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo performing in the 40s through the 60s. More dancers. There's Maria Tallchief. She was one of the first Native American ballerinas. She was from Oklahoma, and she ended up becoming a principal dancer with Balanchine's New York City Ballet. After she performed with Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, she then went to New York City Ballet. She actually just died a couple years ago. These are just some of the dancers that then went off to have their own successes and spread their love of the art in their own way. So you can see that the Ballet Russe led into many different directions, and its impact spread like wildfire throughout the United States. These are pictures of 5 American Indian ballerinas from Oklahoma who began their careers with the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo. There have been very few Native American ballerinas, and so to have 5 come out of this time period was quite unusual and was very great. So Maria Tallchief, Marjorie Tallchief, Maria and Marjorie are sisters. So she was the first American ballerina to go to the Paris Opera Ballet. Maria Tallchief, working with George Balanchine over here in this picture. Rosella Hightower ended up going to Paris and danced with Nureyev. And then we have Marceline Larkin, who started the Tulsa Ballet, and Yvonne Chateau, who is a very beautiful young dancer and started one of the first college dance programs at the University of Oklahoma. I believe all of these dancers were from Oklahoma. So brings us into contemporary ballet. We have American Ballet Theater, New York City Ballet. Both of these companies are still very much prominent and desirable, and employ the best dancers, the top 1% of the ballerinas throughout the world and ballet masters. So George Balanchine, while Serge Diaghilev added costumes and scenery, and George Balanchine, he upheld the tradition of working with composers. However, he liked to strip the costumes down, so you could really see the technique that he was pushing with these dancers. And these dancers lift their legs higher, they do more pirouettes, they have beautiful physiques, and so he liked to show them off. Some more pictures of Balanchine's work. He was a prolific choreographer. Massive amounts of choreography. Jules, that was just performed a year and a half ago at the University of Arizona. The University of Arizona is one of the few schools that has rights to Balanchine repertory. There's only about 3 other dance schools. So for your performance critique, I highly encourage you to go to one of the performances and see your fellow schoolmates performing at the Stevie Eller Dance Theater. They are of a different caliber, these dancers, and I think that you will be impressed with what they can do. So I'm just going to show you some more pictures here. We're not going to talk about Anthony Tudor. So that concludes our broadcast today. So that concludes our broadcast for today. I hope that you learned something. Please go to, I'm hoping that everybody's figured out how to get onto the assignment tab. You go to the discussion, which is now open. There is a video linked on that discussion that is half an hour long. So plan that time accordingly, 45 minutes to watch the video, and then spend some minutes doing first your own comment and then responding to 2 other people's comments. And I will see you next Thursday. Please feel free to email me or call me if you want to have a Google Hangout or meet on campus. Anything, I am available. Thank you, and I'll see you next Thursday.